They called humanity weak and fleeting. Then they saw a message that burned forever. Sergeant Elias Thorne walked through the iridescent archway of the Empyrean Lounge, and the universe seemed to mock him with its beauty. The lounge on Starbase Axiom was a testament to the galaxy's ancient and wealthy species. Gravity-defying sculptures of pure light drifted through the air. Holographic nebulae swirled across the impossibly high ceilings. The vast, panoramic viewport looked out onto the stellar nursery of the Serpent's Cradle, where new suns were being born. The air itself was a finely tuned cocktail of exotic gases and perfumes, humming with the musical clicks, whistles, and subharmonic languages of 24 different species. Elias felt like a smudge of dirt on a masterpiece. His Terran marine fatigues were stiff with dried sweat and grime. The dark green fabric was wrinkled from a 20-hour patrol through the station's grimy maintenance sectors. A faulty power conduit in Sector Gamma had turned a simple inspection into a marathon of manual repairs and rerouting plasma feeds. His boots, designed for muck and rock, felt clumsy and loud on the polished chrome floor. Dark circles framed his brown eyes, and his back ached with a deep, bone-weary complaint. All he wanted was a chair. He just wanted one place to sit down, drink a glass of recycled water, and maybe eat a nutrient paste bar before his debriefing. He scanned the opulent room. A group of Iberians, all 6 of their spindly arms gesturing gracefully, occupied a floating conversational pod. A hulking Gorgon merchant, whose fur was probably worth more than Elias's entire pension, was haggling with a shimmering energy being. They moved with an unhurried grace, a leisure that spoke of lifespans measured in centuries, not decades. To them, 20 hours of labor was a rounding error. To Elias, it was a significant fraction of his remaining day. Then he saw it. Near the center of the lounge, a table of smooth, black metal sat unoccupied. It was a perfect, quiet island in the sea of alien grandeur. 3 of its 4 chairs were empty. Hope, a feeling he hadn't realized was missing, flickered in his chest. He set a course for the table. His tired legs protested each step. The simple act of walking across the room felt like a monumental effort. He was so focused on the chair, on the promise of rest, that he didn't notice the massive figure rising from the 4th seat until it was directly in his path. It was like a mountain deciding to stand up. He had to crane his neck to see its head, a motion that sent a fresh wave of pain through his tired spine. Elias felt like a drab sparrow that had accidentally wandered into a flock of incandescent, celestial peacocks, and one of them had just noticed he didn't belong. The being before him was magnificent and terrifying. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, a bipedal sculpture of what looked like smoky quartz, shot through with veins of incandescent light that pulsed with a slow, arrogant rhythm. Its head was a multifaceted diamond, and 2 glowing yellow orbs, fixed and unblinking, served as eyes. For powerful, crystalline arms hung at its sides, each ending in 3 long, sharp fingers. This was a Cthar, a species renowned for its longevity, strength, and a martial pride that bordered on zealotry. Elias had only ever seen them on news feeds. In person, it felt like standing before a geological event. This seating area is not for your kind, fleshing, the Cthar said. Its voice was a low, grinding rumble, as if mountains were shifting to speak. The universal translator on its broad chest converted the alien phonemes into crisp, condescending English. Find another place. Elias blinked. His tired mind struggled to process the blatant hostility. He gestured with a weary hand toward the empty seat. The chair is unoccupied. I've been on duty for 20 hours. I just need to sit down. The Cthar's internal light seemed to brighten with amusement. It is occupied by my presence. This table is for warriors of consequence, not for short-life primitives who stumble through the galaxy with their fleeting passions and fragile bodies. The conversation, and Vorlag's commanding voice, had drawn attention. The chattering hum of the lounge began to quieten. A multi-limbed Iberian diplomat, suspended in its personal gravity field, drifted closer, its multifaceted eyes swiveling between Elias and the Cthar. A hulking Gorgon merchant, whose shaggy fur was braided with expensive-looking metal rings, paused its transaction to watch, its wide nostrils flaring with interest. The audience was growing. Elias felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, the spark of anger that his marine discipline had taught him to control. "I am a warrior," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Sergeant Elias Thorne, Terran Marine Corps. I've served in 3 combat zones." The Kthar, who Elias now recognized from military briefings as the infamous Vorlag, let out a sound like shattering rock that was clearly a laugh. 3 combat zones. How quaint. He crossed his upper set of arms, a gesture of supreme confidence. "I am Vorlag of the Kthar warrior caste. I have fought in campaigns across 17 star systems. I have personally shattered the orbital defenses of a dozen worlds. My combat experience spans 4 of your human centuries. You, Fleshing, are barely old enough to properly hold a weapon, let alone claim the title of warrior. Human lives are like the flickering of a candle, are they not?" Chimed in the Iberian diplomat, its translator rendering the words in a silken, patronizing tone. "So brief. How could one possibly master anything of substance? My youngest clutch son is older than this human," the Gorgon merchant rumbled, a deep chuckle vibrating through its massive chest. "He is still considered an infant, learning to properly hunt." The circle of onlookers widened. Elias felt trapped, a specimen under a microscope. He could feel the weight of their collective judgment, the casual dismissal of not just him, but his entire species. His training screamed at him to de-escalate, to walk away, to not cause a diplomatic incident. But his pride, weary as it was, refused to be so easily trampled. "I may not have lived for centuries," Elias said, meeting Vorlag's glowing gaze. "But I have seen enough battle to earn a seat at any table." Vorlag stepped closer, the sheer mass of him forcing Elias to take an involuntary step back. The air around the Kthar smelled faintly of ozone and hot stone. "You have seen skirmishes. You have participated in brief, clumsy conflicts born of your species' chaotic nature. You do not know war. War is an art form perfected over millennia. It requires a perspective your fleeting existence cannot possibly grant. Now, take your tired, fragile body elsewhere before you offend the dignity of this space further." Elias's hands, hidden at his sides, clenched into tight fists. His knuckles were white. Every instinct screamed at him to prove this crystalline giant wrong, to show him what a fragile human was capable of. But he saw the bigger picture. He saw the watching aliens, the diplomatic setting, and the uniform he wore. A single punch would not just be an assault. It would be an act of war, and it would be humanity that paid the price for his loss of control. He had to stand down. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than his pack, heavier than his rifle. Elias unclenched his fists, finger by finger. The effort cost him a surprising amount of willpower. He gave Vorlag a curt, barely perceptible nod. It was a gesture of concession. He turned away. The grinding sound of the Kthar's laughter followed him as he walked toward the periphery of the lounge. The gazes of 24 species felt like tiny needles on his back. He found what he was looking for in a dim corner, tucked away behind a nutrient paste dispenser and a flickering janitorial bot. It was a small, scarred table with a single, rickety chair that looked like it had been salvaged from a freighter's mess hall. It was perfect. An exile's throne that he sank into the chair, the metal groaning in protest. He dropped his head into his hands. The rough fabric of his gloves scratched his forehead. He didn't want to listen, but Vorlag's voice was a resonant baritone that carried easily across the opulent room. The Kthar had taken the seat Elias had wanted, and now held court. "You see," Vorlag proclaimed, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "The fleshing understands its place. It runs from a simple contest of will. This is the core of the human species. They possess a flicker of ambition, but it is easily extinguished." Elias squeezed his eyes shut, but the words still found their way in. He could hear the murmurs of agreement, the clicking and chittering of the other aliens as they soaked in the Kthar's pronouncements. "Tell us more, noble Vorlag," the Iberian diplomat prompted, its voice slick with sycophancy. "You served alongside them in the Krexny incursion, did you not? We have heard tales of their cowardice." Cowardice. The word hit Elias like a physical blow. His mind flashed back to the Battle of Titan's Fall, a campaign so brutal the official reports were still classified. He remembered Sergeant Anya Sharma holding a collapsing bulkhead with her own body so her squad could escape. He remembered Corporal Ben Carter, a kid barely out of basic training, charging a Krexny heavy weapons nest armed with nothing but 2 plasma grenades and a final, defiant scream. He remembered 3 days of unrelenting hell, of fighting in vacuum and fire, of sharing his last ration of oxygen with a wounded squadmate, of refusing to yield a single inch of ground until reinforcements arrived. They hadn't run. They had held a line that should have broken 100 times over. Cowardice is a generous term, Vorlag boomed, oblivious to the memories storming through Elias's mind. I witnessed it myself above the colony world of Xylos. The Krexny fleet was formidable, I will grant them that. When their primary warships engaged, the human vessels broke formation and fled. They are panicked children playing with toys they do not comprehend. It fell to the Kthar fleet to hold the line, to shatter the Krexny advance while the humans scattered to safety. It was a lie. It was a grotesque twisting of the truth. The human ships hadn't fled. They had executed a feigned retreat, a textbook tactical maneuver designed to lure the overconfident Krexny fleet into a kill zone near Xylos's asteroid belt. The Kthar fleet, too arrogant and rigid in their tactics to coordinate, had simply charged forward. They claimed the victory that the humans had so carefully engineered. Elias had read the after-action reports. He knew the truth. But what could he say? His word against a decorated Kthar warrior would be dismissed as the whining of a primitive fleshing. So he sat in his corner, stewing in a silent, bitter rage. The injustice was a burning coal in his gut. The lounge doors hissed open, admitting a figure who was the antithesis of the room's alien grandeur. Captain Eva Rostova was a compact woman, her dark red hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun. Her dress uniform was immaculate, the gold insignia on her collar gleaming. She was not tall or imposing, but she moved with an economy of motion, and a quiet authority that made heads turn. Her sharp green eyes swept the room, instantly taking in the tableau. She saw Elias, hunched and isolated in the corner. She saw the crowd of onlookers. And she saw Vorlag, holding court like a conquering king. Elias saw her coming and felt a confusing mix of relief and renewed frustration. He felt relief because his captain was here. He felt frustration because he knew she was bound by the same diplomatic chains that held him. Sergeant Thorne, Rostova said, her voice even and professional as she reached his table. I was looking for you. We need to go over the final patrol logs before they're submitted. Ma'am, Elias replied, gratitude flooding him as he rose to his feet. He had an out. Her gaze flickered past him to Vorlag, a silent, pointed acknowledgement. The Kthar met her look, his internal light pulsing with arrogance. Ah, another human officer, Vorlag rumbled, his voice laced with amusement. I was just educating your subordinate on the vast differences between true warrior cultures and humanity's fleeting attempts at martial prowess. Rostova's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It was the only outward sign of her anger. Elias, who had served under her for 3 years, recognized the look. It was the same expression she'd had before ordering a high-risk plasma burn to save a crippled freighter. I appreciate you sharing your perspective, Vorlag, she said, her tone as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. However, Sergeant Thorne has duties to attend to. Vorlag made the rock-grinding sound of Kthar laughter. Of course, duty. It is commendable when younger species learn from their elders. Perhaps one day, with proper guidance, your people will understand what it means to be a true power in the galaxy. Without another word, Rostova put a firm hand on Elias's shoulder and steered him toward the exit. She didn't look back, her posture ramrod straight. Elias followed, feeling the weight of every condescending stare as they crossed the lounge. Just as the doors began to hiss open, Vorlag's voice boomed after them one last time, a final, parting shot for the entire room to enjoy. Stay close to your protectors, little humans. The void is dark and full of dangers you cannot comprehend. The doors slid shut, cutting off the renewed wave of alien laughter. But the words followed Elias out into the corridor, burning like acid in his ears. Elias's quarters were a sterile, impersonal cube of gray metal. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Empyrean lounge. The room contained only the essentials. There was a narrow bunk that folded into the wall, a small desk, and a single locker for his belongings. This was a space for a soldier, not a person. It was a place to sleep and rearm, nothing more. He sat on the edge of the bunk. The anger from the lounge had cooled into a familiar, bitter resentment. It was a feeling he'd known for most of his 5 years in the Terran Marine Corps. He knew the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, condescension from the elder species. They saw humanity as upstarts, children playing with galactic fire. They saw their short lifespans as a sign of cosmic irrelevance. Borlag hadn't said anything new. He'd just said it louder and with more relish than most. His eyes fell on a small, printed photograph stuck to the metal wall above his desk. It was a picture of him and his younger brother, Leo, taken the day Leo had graduated from the Marine Academy 6 months ago. In the photo, Leo was beaming, his brown eyes bright with a fierce, uncomplicated pride. He looked just like Elias had. At that age, before the combat zones and the long patrols had etched permanent lines of weariness into his own face. Leo, barely 19, had idolized him. He had followed him into the Corps against Elias's advice. Someone has to stand on the wall, Eli, Leo had said, parroting an old phrase from their grandfather. Someone has to watch over the colonies. Leo had been assigned to the Colonial Defense Garrison on Kepler 186F, a peaceful settlement on the far edge of the Orion Arm. Quiet duty, the assignment had read. It was a perfect first posting for a young Corporal. Elias's datapad, lying on the desk, emitted a sharp, insistent chime. A small red light blinked on its surface. It was a Priority 1 message. Those were rare. They meant one of two things: a fleet-wide emergency mobilization or a casualty notification. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, settled in Elias's stomach. He reached for the datapad, his hand unsteady. He pressed his thumb to the scanner and entered his authorization code. The screen lit up, displaying the crest of the Terran Marine Corps Command. The header made his heart stop. Priority alert. Official casualty report. Incident ref. Siege of Kepler 186F. His world narrowed to the glowing text on the screen. He scanned the lines, his vision blurring. A previously unknown hostile species, identified only as the Knock, had descended upon the civilian colony without warning. Their fleet was overwhelming. The colony's defenses were minimal. An emergency evacuation had been initiated. His finger trembled as he scrolled down the list of confirmed casualties. And then he saw it. Thorn, Leo. CPL, service #734, A9-811. 1st Colonial Defense Force. Status: KI. The datapad slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the metal desk. KDA. The 3 letters were a final, brutal judgment. Leo was gone. His smiling, 19-year-old brother was a ghost, a name on a list. A wave of nausea washed over Elias. He leaned forward, bracing himself on the desk, taking deep, ragged breaths. Grief was a physical assault, a crushing weight on his chest that made it impossible to breathe, to think. After a long moment, he picked the datapad back up, forcing himself to read on. He had to know. The after-action summary was brief and clinical, but the story it told was anything but. The Knock ground forces numbered over 2,000. The station's entire defense contingent was less than 50. When the evacuation order was given, most of the garrison had fallen back to protect the civilian spaceport. But one unit, Leo's unit, had volunteered for a rearguard action. A suicide mission. 13 Marines. 13 young soldiers against an army, tasked with holding the main access corridor for as long as possible to give the last civilian transports time to escape. They had held that corridor for 6 hours. The report detailed how they had used cunning and desperation in equal measure. They turned mining equipment into makeshift barricades. They overloaded power conduits to create electrical traps. They fought with combat knives and scavenged tools when their ammunition ran dry. Every line Elias read painted a picture of impossible courage. 30,000 civilians had escaped. All of them. All because 13 Marines had chosen to stand on the wall. At the bottom of the report was a link to an attached file. ID. His brother's last moments. A part of him screamed not to watch, to spare himself that final horror. But a deeper, colder part of him knew he had to. He had to bear witness. With a hand that felt disconnected from his body, he pressed play. The fury that had simmered in the lounge was gone. It was replaced by an immense, soul-crushing sorrow. But beneath the sorrow, something else was beginning to form. A cold, hard resolve. A purpose. Elias's grief was a vast, silent ocean, and he was drowning in it. But as the video began to play, a single point of light appeared in that crushing darkness. It was the image from his brother's helmet camera. The view was chaotic, a visceral lurch into the heart of a firefight. The corridor was a ruin of twisted metal and shattered bulkheads. It was lit by the hellish orange glow of plasma fires and the stuttering strobes of emergency alerts. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burnt ozone. The camera shook with every nearby explosion. The sound was a deafening roar of weapon discharges, alien shrieks, and the strained, shouted commands of the Marines. Hold position at the junction. Don't let them get a foothold. That was Leo's voice, but it was different. It was not the easygoing laugh of the boy in the photograph. It was the hard, clear voice of a combat leader. The camera view swiveled. Elias saw two other Marines. Their armor was scorched and dented. They were laying down, suppressing fire from behind a makeshift barricade of cargo containers. An alien knock, a hulking insectoid creature with four scythe-like arms, charged through the smoke. Before it could reach them, a jury-rigged arc welder, positioned in a side alcove, sparked to life. It spewed a torrent of molten metal that caught the creature in the chest. It went down with a high-pitched scream. This was ingenuity born of desperation. Elias watched as if in a trance. His own reality faded away, replaced by the last hour of his brother's life. He saw Leo. His face was visible for a moment in a reflection on a scorched metal plate. His youthful features were smeared with grime and blood. There was a deep gash over his right eye. He was calmly directing his squad, pointing out targets, calling for reloads. His voice was a steady anchor in the storm of violence. He saw them fall, back from one defensive point to the next. They moved always slowly, always making the knock pay for every inch of ground in blood and bodies. They were not panicked. They were not cowardly. They were professionals, doing an impossible job with grim determination. The video jumped. The scene was now darker, quieter. The squad was down to 6. They were huddled in a small engineering nexus. The sounds of the knock battering at the sealed door echoed ominously. Leo's breathing was heavy and ragged. His left arm hung limp and useless at his side. Status? Leo asked. The hope of Argos just cleared the last docking clamp. Came a tired voice from another Marine. That's the last of them. All civilian transports are away. A wave of palpable relief washed over the small group. A few of them smiled, their teeth white in their soot-stained faces. They had done it. This is Corporal Leo Thorne, 1st Colonial Defense Force, Leo said. His voice was now addressed to the recording function of his helmet. His gaze seemed to look through the screen, directly at Elias. If anyone finds this, tell command the evacuation of Kepler 186F is 100% successful. All 30,000 civilians are clear. He paused, and the camera turned to his remaining squadmates. They were checking their weapons, sharing their last power cells, getting ready for the end. Tell my family I'm sorry I can't come home. But this was right. They needed us. And we were here. Another thunderous boom shook the door. It was beginning to buckle. Hey, Eli, Leo said, his voice suddenly soft and personal. He was smiling. It was a tired, sad, but genuine smile that broke Elias's heart all over again. I know you'll probably see this. Don't be sad. Okay, I kept my promise. Remember? Protect the people who can't protect themselves. Well, I did. 30,000 of them. The door groaned, then burst inward in a shower of sparks. Knock warriors poured through the opening. Leo raised his rifle with his one good arm. The camera swiveled to the fight for a moment, then back to his own face. His expression was now serene. Don't let them tell you we were weak, he whispered, a final message meant only for his brother. We held the line. That's what being a Marine is all about. Tell them we held the line. The last thing Elias saw was the flash of an alien plasma blade. Then the feed dissolved into a blizzard of white static. The static hissed for a long moment before the screen went black. Elias sat in the profound silence of his quarters. The echoes of the battle still rang in his ears. The ocean of grief was still there, vast and deep. But now something else rose from its depths. It was not anger, not anymore. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. This was different. It was cold, clear, and perfectly still. It was purpose. The shame he had felt in the lounge seemed like a distant memory, a trivial insult from another lifetime. The condescending voices of Vorlag and the others were meaningless whispers against the thunder of his brother's sacrifice. Elias Thorne stood up. His movements were no longer weary or hesitant. They were precise and deliberate. He picked up the datapad. Its metallic shell was cool against his skin. It was no longer just a piece of military hardware. It was a testament. It was a sacred relic holding the final words of a true warrior. He straightened his rumpled uniform, tugging the hem of his tunic down until the creases were sharp. He ran a hand through his hair, slicking it back from his face. When he looked at his reflection in the dark screen of the monitor, he saw the same brown eyes, but the exhaustion was gone. It was burned away by the cold fire of his resolve. He was no longer just Sergeant Thorne, a tired soldier. He was now an avatar of his brother's memory, a messenger with a story that had to be told. He walked out of his quarters and back toward the Empyrean lounge. His stride was even and measured. The soft thud of his combat boots on the deck plates was a steady, rhythmic beat. He was no longer trying to be invisible. He walked down the center of the corridor, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Aliens stepping out of their quarters saw him coming and instinctively moved aside. Their antennae or eye stalks twitched at the sudden, dangerous shift in the human's demeanor. Where before there had been a defeated slump, there was now an unbreakable spine of forged steel. The iridescent archway of the lounge shimmered before him. He stepped through without hesitation. The same scene greeted him. The opulent decor, the swirling nebulae on the ceiling, and the chattering collection of ancient and powerful beings. Vorlag was still at the central table, regaling his audience with what was likely another embellished tale of his own prowess. The conversations faltered as Elias entered. A wave of whispers rippled through the room. The fleshing returns. What does it want now? Perhaps it forgot one of its primitive toys. Elias ignored them all. His focus was singular. He walked directly toward the center of the room. His path took him right past Vorlag's table. The massive Cthar stopped his story mid-sentence. His glowing yellow eyes fixed on Elias with surprise, which quickly curdled into renewed amusement. Ah, the little human has come back. Vorlag boomed, a smirk in his rumbling voice. Have you come to apologize for your earlier weakness? Have you finally decided to learn your place? Elias didn't even glance at him. He continued walking until he stood before the lounge's main holographic display, the massive screen that dominated the far wall. He took a small connector cable from his belt and, with a steady hand, plugged his datapad into the lounge's public interface. The display, which had been showing a serene animation of a rotating star cluster, flickered and went blank. The entire lounge was now silent. Every eye was on him. Elias turned slowly, not to face Vorlag, but to address the entire room. He saw the Iberian diplomat, the Gorgon merchant, and a dozen other species all staring at him with a mixture of confusion and disdain. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the chilling clarity of a funeral bell. You wanted to know about human warriors, he said. You judged us. You mocked us. He raised his head. For the first time, they could see the tear tracks on his face. It was a stark contrast to the unshakable resolve in his eyes. Now let me show you. With a tap on his datapad, the vast holographic screen flickered to life. It did not show a propaganda film or a recruitment video. It displayed the stark, official header of a Terran Marine Corps after-action report. The document was dense with military jargon, casualty statistics, and tactical appendices. But its authenticity was undeniable, stamped with encrypted seals of the highest security clearance. The low murmur of the lounge died completely, replaced by an attentive, curious silence. 3 days ago, Elias began, his voice devoid of emotion, a cold, flat delivery of facts. The civilian colony on Kepler 186F was attacked by a Nock invasion force. A tactical map appeared on the screen, showing the colony station and the swarm of red icons that represented the enemy fleet. The colony's defenses were negligible. 30,000 civilians were trapped. The local garrison consisted of 48 Marines. 13 of them, a single rifle squad, were assigned to a rearguard action at the main evac hub. He let the numbers hang in the air. 13 against an army. My brother, Corporal Leo Thorne, was one of them. Elias tapped the screen again, and the dry report vanished. It was replaced by the shaky, visceral reality of Leo's helmet camera. The lounge, with its scented air and holographic art, was instantly submerged in the hell of the Kepler 186F corridors. The pristine chrome floor reflected the flash of plasma bolts and the orange tongues of chemical fires. The sounds of battle, the sharp crack of human pulse rifles, the sickening shriek of knock energy weapons, the percussive thump of grenades, filled the opulent space, raw and unfiltered. The assembled aliens watched, transfixed. They saw the young human soldiers fighting with a desperate, savage intelligence. They saw them using scorched service panels as shields, rigging power conduits to arc electricity across choke points, and fighting hand-to-hand in the swirling smoke when their weapons overheated. Vorlag, who had been sneering just moments before, now stood motionless. His glowing eyes were fixed on the screen. His crystalline arms hung limp. His own combat experiences were of grand fleet maneuvers and honorable duels. This was something else entirely. This was not war as an art form. It was survival as a bloody, brutal masterpiece. The scene shifted to the engineering nexus, the quiet before the final storm. The aliens heard the young human corporal confirm the successful evacuation of 30,000 souls. They saw the exhausted smiles on the faces of the few surviving Marines. The blue-skinned Iberian diplomat leaned forward, its 6 arms clutching the edge of its grav pod. "They are smiling," it whispered, its translator barely audible. "They know they are trapped. They know they are going to die, but they are smiling." The Gorgon merchant next to him shook its massive, furry head. "There is no profit in this," it rumbled, its voice a low thrum of pure confusion. "No territory is gained. No resources are secured. I do not understand the strategy." Then came Leo's final message. His voice, so young, so calm, echoed through the silent lounge. When he spoke his brother's name, Elias felt a fresh wave of grief, but his face remained a stoic mask. The camera focused on Leo's own face, streaked with blood and grime, and that impossible, heartbreaking smile. The final, defiant words, "Don't let them tell you we were weak. We held the line," were followed by the piercing shriek of static as the feed cut out. The screen went black. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the Empyrean lounge was the soft hum of the station's life support. The aliens were processing what they had just witnessed. They had seen a fleshing, a short life, a child, playing with toys, face certain annihilation not with panic or despair, but with a serene, smiling acceptance, all for the sake of strangers. This was an act of courage so profound, so utterly alien to their own calculations of glory, honor, and self-preservation, that it defied their understanding of the universe. Vorlag's magnificent crystalline form seemed to have shrunk. The arrogant light within him had dimmed, replaced by the flickering, uncertain glow of a mind in catastrophic conflict with itself. Everything he had believed about strength, about what it meant to be a warrior, had been laid waste in the space of a 2-minute video clip. He had boasted of his centuries of life, of the dozens of worlds he had fought on. But what was all that time, all that conquest, compared to the last 6 hours of this one human boy's life? He, Vorlag the Conqueror, had never saved anyone. He had only taken. The dawning horror on his face was not because he had witnessed death. It was because he had just witnessed a form of strength he never knew existed. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his crystalline core, that he did not possess it. The holographic display went dark. It plunged the lounge back into its ambient, opulent lighting, but the mood was irrevocably broken. The air, once filled with casual arrogance, was now thick with a heavy, stunned silence. Elias turned from the console. His datapad was held loosely in his hand. His face was a mask of grief, yet his posture was as straight and unyielding as a monument. He faced the room of aliens. Their varied and strange faces now reflected not mockery, but a profound and unsettling awe. Vorlag stood frozen for a long moment, the great warrior humbled into a statue of smoky quartz. The arrogant light that had pulsed within him was gone. He looked smaller, diminished, as if the truth he had just witnessed had chipped away at his very essence. He took a slow, hesitant step toward Elias. His movements were no longer booming with confidence, but quiet and uncertain. The grinding sound of his voice, when he finally spoke, was gone. It was replaced by a low, rough whisper. He fought, not for glory. The question was directed at Elias, but it felt like the Cthar was asking the universe itself. Not for conquest. There was no tactical advantage to be gained. His sacrifice, it was absolute. For nothing. Not for nothing, Elias corrected. His voice was quiet, but carried across the silent room. He fought so that 30,000 others might live, so that children he would never meet could grow up. That is the human way. The Gorgon merchant shifted its massive bulk. Its customary bravado was replaced by a look of deep consternation. To trade one's own life for strangers, it is a poor bargain. The value exchange is negative. That is because you measure strength in what you can take, Elias said, his gaze sweeping over the assembled aliens. We measure it in what we are willing to give. Vorlag reached Elias, stopping a few feet away. The Cthar, who had towered over him with contempt, now seemed to be looking at him for the first time. The glowing yellow orbs of his eyes were dim, their internal fire banked. I have lived for 800 of your years, Vorlag said. His voice struggled with concepts his long life had never prepared him for. I have seen sons die and empires turn to dust. I have led armies that have conquered worlds. I have seen countless warriors die for honor, for their clan, for the glory of victory. He paused. The facets of his crystalline head caught the light in a dull, muted way. But I have never seen this. A warrior smiling at his own death because the people he was paid to protect, people not even of his own clutch, had escaped. He looked down at his own powerful, four-fingered hands, as if seeing them for the first time. I called your kind primitive, he admitted. The words sounded like they were being scraped from the very core of his being. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air. It was a shocking, universe-altering statement. It wasn't an apology. It was a complete recalibration of reality. The Iberian diplomat floated silently, its manipulative grace gone, replaced by a still, contemplative horror. The other aliens exchanged glances. Their earlier unity of mockery was shattered into individual fragments of confusion, fear, and a terrifying, dawning respect. They had mocked humanity for their short lives. But they had just witnessed a 19-year-old human achieve a form of immortality through a single act of sacrifice. It was an act none of them, with their centuries and millennia of existence, could ever imagine performing. They had judged humanity by the wrong metrics. They had measured the candle by its length, not by the brightness of its flame. Vorlag turned his gaze from Elias to the central table. He looked at the single empty chair that had been the catalyst for this entire confrontation. For a long moment, he stared at it. The smooth black metal reflected his own dim, shifting light. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he gestured toward it with one of his crystalline hands. The gesture was not a dismissal. It was an invitation. It was an offering. Sergeant Thorne, he said. The honorific was pronounced with a newfound, unpracticed respect. His voice was quiet, stripped of all its former arrogance. Will you do me the honor of sharing this table? Elias looked from the Cthar to the chair. Hours ago, it had represented a simple, desperate need for rest. Now, it was something else entirely. It was a treaty table, a bridge between two wildly different concepts of strength. The anger in his own heart had been spent. It was washed away by the tide of his grief and replaced by a weary, profound pride in the brother he had lost. He gave a single, solemn nod and walked to the table. As he sat, the rickety chair in the corner fell a universe away. Vorlag took the seat opposite him. The other aliens, who had been a circle of judgment, now began to approach. Their movements were tentative. Their expressions were a mixture of awe and apprehension. The Iberian diplomat floated closer, its usual manipulative posture gone, replaced by genuine curiosity. The Gorgon merchant ambled over, his thoughts clearly on matters far beyond profit and loss. Tell us more about your brother, Vorlag requested, his voice a low rumble. About the one you called Leo. Your species, your concept of duty is not in our archives, the Iberian added. We wish to understand. Elias looked at the varied alien faces gathered around him. They were not mocking him now. They were not judging him. They were asking. They were trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. And in that moment, Elias knew what he had to do. He wouldn't tell them about Corporal Thorne, the warrior. He would tell them about Leo, the boy who loved to read ancient history, who was terrible at cooking, who wrote letters home every week, and who dreamed of being a teacher after his tour of duty was over. He would explain that humans fought so fiercely for peace because they, in their short, fragile lives, cherished it more than anything. That a new dialogue had begun in the Empyrean lounge. It was not a conversation of conquerors and primitives, of elders and children. It was a quiet, hesitant discussion between beings who had just realized the galaxy was infinitely more complex than they had ever imagined. It was all because one young human, in his final moments, chose to give everything for nothing more than love.